Hello, hello, and welcome to Journey to SEA 2025. This is Shelley-Ann Edwards Barron, your creative writing specialist, here to talk things narratives, reports, and comprehension. Thank you so much for joining me. And before we get started, for those who are new, let me just reintroduce myself. My name is Shelley-Ann Edwards Barron, and I'm a creative writing specialist. Yes, I said that. I'm repeating it because what I want you to know is that I look at creative writing a little bit differently from many instructors because what I try to do is to incorporate multisensory learning in the teaching of creative writing. What is multisensory learning? All that means is that you're using all your senses, as many senses as possible in a lesson to engage students. And what that does is to help them introduce and interact. That's what I was looking for. To help them interact with the material in fun and interesting ways so that they move from hating writing to thinking, okay, writing isn't so bad after all. I mean, I can't promise that they're going to go from hating writing to loving it, although some students do. But the idea is that they can see that writing is more than just putting words on paper. There's a lot that goes into it, and we can learn about writing in fun and interesting ways. So, if you want to learn more about multisensory learning with creative writing, send me a message 7174993. You can WhatsApp me and we can chat about that. Um, in this session, we're talking about reports, narratives, and comprehension. We're looking at a couple things related to that. So let's see. At this point in the students' interaction, we're still trying to make the lessons as interactive and multisensory as possible. So after each section, I'm going to share with you some ideas about how you can actually do that. Before we get started, let me share my screen. We have discussed in terms of the um, paragraphs 1 to 4 with the reports. We can look at, I think we touched on quite a few things with the narratives. We looked at getting started. We looked at the plot. We looked at all the different aspects of writing, giving descriptions, and so on. And so we are in our second round of discussion on all the different skills. And for comprehension, we've already looked at context clues, types of questions, and nonfiction comprehension. So if you've missed those, then definitely go back and take a look at those videos. Lots of awesome content there as well. So, all right, getting into what we're doing today. These are my reminders for the week. It's a new feature that I started with these presentations because as I interact with my students and parents, I learn tons of different things that make a difference in the way that I teach and create materials. And so I thought it would be a really good idea to share some of those with you. And so I think I've been doing it for like 3, 4 weeks now. So you can go back and check at the beginning of each of the other episodes to see what you can learn there as well. This week, we're looking at making space for grammar and spelling strategies, as well as teaching students how to edit and modeling writing. So these are the things that I was reminded of this week. Now, the first came through a conversation with a parent. And I did mention to her that I would talk about it during the live today, so she's okay with that. Um, she was telling me that her daughter is scoring pretty well with the creative writing. However, the comments consistently have her pay attention to the grammar, have her pay attention to the spelling. Those are the areas that she needs to work on. Yet, the writing at school, the teacher works primarily on the content of the materials. In other lessons, classes, writing and reviewing plot and content and all those things, really awesome for helping her develop the information. And even with focusing on the grammar and spelling components of the SEA exam, those details are really focused on the exam format where students would have to read a paragraph or a few sentences and identify spelling errors and fix them. Um, that does not help a student overall with grammar and spelling. That is specific to exam preparations and what would be required for that part of the ELA exam. So, what I recommended to her were a couple of things in terms of identifying where the issues are and really zeroing in on that. And so, as we were having that conversation, I really was reminded that writing, creative writing in general, includes a number of skills. And while the creative writing classes can focus on developing content and plot and making sure all the descriptions are there, there are some other skills and knowledge that students would need to implement that would not be a primary focus of a creative writing class. Now, grammar, spelling, punctuation, those are what we call the mechanics or the technical side of writing and can be looked at from time to time, but they really should be covered separately. So, a teacher who focuses on those three areas would lose time in a creative writing class. So, most teachers would focus on like the descriptions and all those other things and putting sentences together, which would include some of the punctuation and so on, but it's not like lessons in punctuation or lessons in grammar. Those things need to be done separately. And so parents can work on those things at home with students because at this point, the students would already know many of the things that they would need to do. It's just really a matter of having them implemented. If you run into a situation where the child is making several mistakes, let's say if you have spelling issues anywhere above 2 to 3 spelling errors in an essay with a student, then spelling is a challenge. So students are allowed, 2 to 3 mistakes because okay, they're writing on the go on a timed practice and all those things. So they're allowed, certain mistakes. However, if they are consistently making 5 or more mistakes, then you definitely need to pay attention to spelling or punctuation or grammar, whichever the issue is. And so that is something we need to create strategies for that separately. And those strategies, we'll get to them in a little bit, but think about it this way. The creative writing instructor is going to be focusing on plot, character description, content, the paragraphing for reports, and overall concepts where the student is sharing ideas and showing the student how to share those ideas effectively. The grammar, spelling, and punctuation will be touched on from time to time, but they can't be the main focus. That is, I just saw a cycle. So let me make sure I repeat that, but it's on screen so that you could get that. I think there's a little challenge with the internet connection today. Anyway, so that's with the grammar and spelling and so on. And then the other thing is, so I'll get back to that because I have a separate slide to give you a few pointers on that. The other thing, the other lesson or reminder is that students need to be taught how to edit. When you ask a student, have you read over? They say yes, because yes, they have read over. But when they read over their writing, when they read over their essays, their reports, or their narratives, what are they doing during that time? Are they just reading it to see if it sounds good? Or are they reading it with the idea of looking for errors and making changes? And so the practice of the first section of the ELA exam, where students have to identify errors in punctuation, spelling, and grammar, those kinds of strategies are what they really need to implement when they're reading over their essays before they submit. Once they have a fair amount of time to read it over, then go through that process with them. So they're not just reading over for the gist of it or the idea of it. They are reading over for the purpose of identifying punctuation issues. They're reading over for the purpose of identifying grammatical issues and spelling issues. And so this would be unique to each child. They're not just reading over generally looking for things. Some students, like a student who has an issue with spelling, they would be reading over specifically for spelling because that's going to enhance their mark. A student who has issues with making mistakes with grammar, then they would be reading over specifically for grammar. And the same with punctuation. If punctuation is an issue like commas, they're specifically reading over for that. So it's not like a general read over. Students have to learn how to read over and look for specific things. And then finally, I did a modeling introduction. So I wrote the introduction. The students selected the prompt for me, and then I went through the process of how I planned the report and how I would put together the first paragraph, which is the introduction. And so that gives students an opportunity to see how things are done so that they can practice when they are putting things together. So it's not enough just to tell them how to do it and show them written work that has already been completed. It is also a really good idea to model the writing and go through the process of the teacher writing the story for the students, having discussion with the students and having them put the essay together with guidance from the teacher. And all right, so I think we are back. Ooh, so sorry about that. No, I saw the glitches and I was hoping it would have held out for the rest of the session, but I guess I was wrong. So, I'm gonna have to do a quick recap on what we were talking about, just in case the glitching meant that you weren't able to cover, you weren't able to understand what I was saying. So let's go back to my screen and see. We're really talking about the reminders that I had this week. The first one, creative writing includes many skills like details like grammar and spelling, and these need separate strategies if they are an issue. So, what I said was that the creative writing teacher would be focusing on the content and the way the information is presented. But like grammar, spelling, and punctuation, these are considered writing. And therefore, if a student is having challenges with those, then parents and teachers need to create separate strategies for dealing with them. Um, Secondly, students need to be taught how to edit. Many students, when they read over their work, they just read it to, okay, it's sounding okay. Reading over for the purpose of making it better also includes the grammar, spelling, punctuation. And so for students who are having specific challenges, they have to read for those specific challenges. And so if a student, let's say, like in my case, I often don't include the character description. It's something that I I'm aware it's supposed to be there. When I plan, I make notes about it. But when I'm writing and I'm into the story, I tend to focus on the action and descriptions, not including the character description. So when I'm reading over my own work, I look specifically for character descriptions. And if I don't find any, I know that I need to add in because that is going to be part of the grading. And so students who have specific challenges when they are reading over, they ought to be reading over for those specific challenges, not just reading over in general. All right. And then finally, modeling writing is very helpful to students. And so this week I did modeling for a report and just to show the students the process of planning the report, deciding what information to put in, and then crafting the essay itself. Students are able to see how things are put together, where details come from, and how to organize themselves. So while I was doing it, I wasn't just doing it in silence. I was explaining, okay, at this point, this is what I do, and this is how I do it. So that students got that step by step and they saw how it was done. So they know what to do, but they also need to know how it's done. And modeling writing really helps with that. Okay, and in terms of the grammar, punctuation, and spelling, we might also need to pay attention to what the issue actually is, because when we see a spelling error or a grammatical error, the assumption is that the child has issues with grammar or the child has issues with spelling, but that is not always the case. It could be any number of other things. And one thing that often happens is that students have challenges with giving descriptions. And so they concentrate so much on adding in descriptions that they neglect other aspects of their writing. And so they make what are called silly mistakes. If you hear or you get feedback and the teacher or tutor says, these are silly mistakes, these are petty mistakes because the child knows the answer. When I point it out, they fix it. But when they're writing, they can't seem to recognize these challenges. If that is happening, then it's not the grammar and it's not the spelling. It is actually more about the exam strategy, the child's confidence with writing, and where they actually put their focus. And so pay attention to what's happening because seeing a grammatical mistake and saying, hey, this child needs to work on grammar is all well and good, but then at the end of the day, you may be working on something that the child doesn't necessarily need to focus on. And so you want to use the time wisely by making sure you understand what the real challenge is. And if this is something that is a little bit difficult for you as a parent to identify, speak to the teacher, speak to tutors, get help with an educational consultant and see if you can identify what the issues are, because we want to make sure that we're using the time wisely. And for spelling, if the issues have been identified and spelling is an issue, you can really work on spelling every day. Even if you do one or two words every day for all of like 10 minutes every day, work it into your schedule, paying attention to how the spelling is done, a few words, learn these two words, test them, write a sentence with these words. So, what I recommended to the parent I had the conversation with is to every week make a list of, I would say, 10 words that the child needs to work on. These are words that they want to use, maybe descriptive words, maybe words that would help them in the writing, and make a list of just 10 and have the child go through those words and every day do something related to those words. So one day you might just call out the words and they write them and you check whether they understand the spelling. Another day, choose two or three words at random and have the child write a sentence with using the word. And in that way, you're checking the spelling as well. Play a game with it, do an anagram, do like hangman or something with the words. And so we're looking at interacting with the words in multiple different ways. So we don't just want to have the child listen and write, we want to have the child interact with the vocabulary as well. And so you might want to have the child do a sketch. So they write the word and do some artwork. When they think of this word, what do they imagine? Draw that. And so these are all multisensory ways to work on spelling that would help the child really get involved with the word and develop what we call word consciousness. And so you can even look at the part of speech, how the word is used in a sentence. And so there are many different things. And so you can do 10 words. You may not always be able to do everything with all 10 words. So maybe 5 words might be more manageable. But even if you only do 5 words, it might seem like a little bit. But in 10 weeks, that's 50 words that the child would be using correctly and spelling correctly in their writing. And at the end of the month, so let's say 4 weeks, 5 words, that's 20 words for 1 month. And then at the end of the month, you do a comprehensive review of all the words that were studied during the month. And then you keep adding, but you always come back with, the surprise word from what we did before. So that way the child is always maintaining their understanding of these words. And you really want them to have the interaction and using the word in context. And so these are the kinds of things that you can do with the spelling that can help systematically and step by step integrate the learning of spelling words on a daily basis. You could literally do this every day, just 10 minutes out of the day. All right, so I really wanted to sort of drop a bit of information on that because I know we have been talking a lot about the content and the different sections of the essays and so on, and we don't really spend time too much on the grammar, learning of the grammar, but they are grammar, spelling, punctuation. These are also important aspects of writing that could cause a child to lose marks in their stories and in their reports. So make sure you have a plan for reviewing spelling and a plan for reviewing the grammar. You and punctuation as well. You can do the same thing with the grammar and the punctuation. Just do a little bit a few times per week, focusing on what the child needs to do in terms of their writing and development. Okay, so that's it for the lessons and extra stuff. Let's get into the discussions that are carded for today with the creative writing in particular. So we're starting with reports as usual, and today we're on to paragraph 5. Paragraph 5 is perhaps one of the most misunderstood and least, what is the word? Completed sentences. I'm saying sentences, paragraphs, um, in a report, it's like it's the one part of the report that has the most ambiguity and confusion, where students don't know what to do next and how to add in this paragraph 5. So the number one thing to remember is that reports don't always have to have this paragraph 5. So even though we're working with a 5 paragraph report, there are some reports that, based on the students' interactions and the situation, the report will just naturally end at paragraph 4. So that's the number one thing to keep in mind as we're working on this paragraph 5. Okay, so if you have a paragraph 5, what do you include in the paragraph 5? So the first thing is you want to pay attention to what has changed or what changes will be made as a result of what happened in this situation. So we're looking at outcomes and consequences. So what are the lingering outcomes? So there are some immediate outcomes like, injuries and different things if it's an incident or accident report. Immediate outcome for a competition might be who came first, second, and third. Excuse me. That would be done in paragraph 4. The lingering outcomes would be what happens after that, that would be related to the report itself. So after we've identified first, second, and third, what happens next? Prize giving could happen next. Um, Judges could make comments. The announcers could make comments. Lots of different things can happen in a competition. If it's an incident or an accident, after the people have been attended to with injuries and so on, then there could be punishments. Like suspension from school, having to write lines, having to clean up things, having to pay back for things that were damaged or defaced, and so on. And consequences, those are part of the consequences. We could look at announcements being made and so on. The real key with fully getting paragraph 5 done effectively is we want to see if we can give information that the reader would not already know. And so we want to balance that with information that the writer, as a participant or an observer, is privileged to know. Because if you're not at the principal's office, you're not going to know what the principal told the student, unless when the student returns to class, they tell you. So those are the kinds of things that you can include. We have to pay attention to details the reader would not already know and balance that with our perspective as the writer. Are we participating? Are we in the space where we can get details that we can add? So definitely, definitely, if it's an injury report and somebody was carted off in an ambulance, we're not talking about what happened with the doctors and in the ambulance or anything like that, because we are not there. We didn't go with them in the ambulance to find out anything of the sort. We are writing about what we are privileged to know as participants and observers in a situation which would be in our immediate environment. And so we also want to think about the details that will help the readers. Because remember, this report is being written for a purpose, right? There's a reason this report is being put together. And so, what details will help the reader make the decisions that they have to make? That is what you'd have to think about as well. And so it doesn't come automatically to students, because this requires really critically analyzing a situation and the audience who's reading and what their purpose is and all those things. And so for this week, working on report writing, what you want to do is to spend some time analyzing situations and outlining the details that go to the situation. So this is something that you should have been doing all along, and you're continuing this because you really want to get the student into a habit of analyzing situations and being able to see all the details of the situation. And then you want to practice brainstorming what goes into paragraph 5, making sure you meet the criteria. I have to be privileged to the information. I need to choose information that's going to be relevant to the situation and help the reader with their purpose. And three, it has to be something that is a lasting outcome or a result or consequence of the situation at hand. And so, as always, in terms of if you don't already have copies of these documents, get your copies because this one, the 5 reports challenge, has sample reports that you can review and take a look at that paragraph 5, how it works. Um, and then there are prompts there that you can practice with, and then the report planning, the 25 worksheets that help you go through paragraph by paragraph with the prompt so that you could sort of visualize and understand and analyze the information, what goes into each section. All right, so that is the agenda for report writing. Now let's turn our attention to the narrative writing. And in today's session, we're going to be talking about introducing problems. Now, one of the main features of an SEA story, the kinds of stories that students are going to write for the exam, is that it needs to have a challenge or conflict or problem that the main character faces. In fact, it should include several. My recommendation is to have 3 so that you can get the rising action. But regardless of if you have one, if you're writing a really short one, if the student is going to do 3 paragraphs, the idea is that you have to introduce the problem. Problems need to feel natural and sort of come out of what's happening with the action and so on in the story. So, how do you do that? The first thing is that students need to understand what problems are and how problems can look in a story. So, the first item I want to remind you of is that problems and conflict can come from many different sources, so that there are different ways the problem can be introduced depending on the source. So the problem can come from another character, in which case there's a villain or somebody doing something specifically in the story. The problem can come from nature, whether animals or the weather. Problems can come from science and technology, things malfunctioning, aliens, robots, science experiments going wrong. Conflict and problems can come from rules and regulations that the student or the character doesn't like, and they're breaking the rules. And so there are others as well. And so think about where the problem is coming from. What's the source of the problem? And that can give ideas about how to introduce the problem. Conflict doesn't always have to be life threatening. This is something that students really need to explore as well. So, like, I remember, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, I have a student whose teacher told them, um, they're writing about a day at the beach, an exciting day at the beach, and the teacher said, hey, nobody drowning or anything, please, or almost drowning. And the students were stuck. They don't know what to write about because if there is no threat to life, then what else can I write about at the beach? And so this is where really understanding what conflict is, what problems can arise in a story. This is where students can be really helped with that. For example, in that beach story, a student could be um, trying to collect shells. They're having a race with their siblings on who could collect the most, um, or who could get the most beautiful thing. So you could turn it into sort of competition. We can have students going fishing and, pulling up a really big fish and it almost getting away. You can have the weather spoiling the event. So there are lots of different sources of the challenges that students can face or the characters can face. And so it is a really good idea to sort of brainstorm that as well and have students see that, hey, I don't always have to get a leg chopped off or, any kind of bleeding or damage or almost dying in a story for there to be conflict or for the story to be exciting. We can write exciting stories about situations where, um, you know, like with the fishing and, getting the big fish or another fish coming and taking away the fish that you just caught, or, somebody stealing something. There are lots of different ways that we can introduce drama and excitement in a story. And so this is something that I work on with my students so that they can really understand how they can develop stories with excitement that doesn't always have to be near death experiences. And one of the ways to really figure out what kinds of problems to introduce is to think about what the character wants. Remember, if the character doesn't want anything, then nothing is really going to be too much of an issue, unless it's life threatening. But if the character wants something, then the efforts at getting it can be told in an exciting way that doesn't necessarily include life-threatening issues. I mean, think about it. Let's say the character wants to get ice cream and they have to convince their parents first to give them the money for the ice cream, and then they have to go chase down the ice cream vendor, and then all the challenges of getting to the vendor. Maybe they have to jump over things, run around things, and when they think they come up to him, maybe there's no more ice cream left, or so there are lots of ways that we could introduce issues, but the character has to want something in order for a lot of those issues and conflict to feel like if they make sense and that they are actually conflict and challenges. And so these are the things that we want to work on with students. How do you work on that? Then of course, um, I'll give you a few ideas, and definitely you can check in with me. I do have classes where I'm working on drilling ideas with students. I don't have any space in my one-on-one classes right now. Well, one-on-one sessions are all booked up, but I am working on some worksheets that would help you. They're not quite finished yet, so just send me a WhatsApp message. The number is on the screen if you want to find out more about how to do these things. I am also going to be doing parent teacher training courses on how to teach these things in December. I really want to get the worksheets sorted out before I do the training classes. So check in with me about that and I'll share more information as time continues. But in terms of introducing challenges, these are some ways that the challenges could be introduced, or the conflict, the problems, whatever you want to call it. So you could have the character in a situation where they have to make a decision, and making the decision is the first part of the challenge, and then it could increase in intensity as we move on from there. You can have like another character say something or do something that is in opposition to what the main character is currently doing. And you can also include a surprise or a sudden change in mood. So if they're at the beach and everything is going lovely, then maybe change in the weather, or somebody new comes on the beach playing a lot of loud music, or whatever the situation is, you can add something that's a sudden addition that changes the current mood. Somebody sees something moving in the sky, they could see a spaceship, they could have aliens, something could come up out of the sea. Lots of different exciting things that can happen that would change the mood that was established in the paragraph one. And so these are the kinds of things that students need to be going through in order to really help them understand conflict, how it works, how to introduce it, and develop it further. So this week, you want to review stories to see how the problems were introduced and escalated. So, escalated meaning how did the problems get worse before they got better? And then you want to kind of practice a few different ways and see which one feels more natural and exciting to the student, and then focus on those for more practice and more details. And then eventually you want to write a story this week. And so working on the narratives and conflict and having problems, remember that there must always be a problem or a challenge or a conflict for the character to face or overcome. Those are the kinds of stories that you're writing, not just a feel good, this is what I'm doing in a day kind of story. We want challenges. Then you want to make sure the challenges are introduced effectively and that they grow or they develop over time before they are eventually solved. And you want to practice introducing and developing them. And those are some of the things that you're working on this week. And so, to help with that, these 7 stories challenges, you have 7 sample stories so that you could read and look and see how the challenges were introduced and how they were developed before they got better. There are 21 narrative prompts for you to practice with. If you don't already have a copy of this, definitely get a copy because it will help you with that development. And there is a copy of the diagram of the 12-point plot development. That's the format for plotting. There's a worksheet in there as well that can help you. All right. So on to comprehension. So what are we working on with comprehension today? We're dealing with fiction comprehension. And so let's do a little review of that before we get into anything else. Now, the elements of fiction would be very similar, if not identical, to the elements of narrative writing or story writing because the the fiction is an actual story. It might be like a section of a story, if not a whole complete short story. And so you would have dialogue, you would have characters, descriptions of emotions and setting, you'd have problems that characters have to overcome, you'd have lessons learned, all the different things that you would have in a story, in a narrative. That's what you're going to get in the fiction passage. And therefore, the plot would be developed the same way that you would a narrative story writing if the student was writing it. You would have an introduction, introducing characters and what's going on. You would have a problem that's introduced that gets worse over time. And then you'd have the characters figuring out or solving the problem or getting close to solving the problem. It depends on how the story goes. Doesn't always have to have the solution because it might be a snippet of a story or an excerpt, not a complete story. And so we know about that development. And unlike the nonfiction, fiction passages generally are a page and a half to 2 pages. Remember, the nonfiction passage is usually just the 1 page. You get 4 to 5 paragraphs, depending on the length of the paragraphs. But we generally see in the exams, the nonfiction would stick to 1 page. The fiction, however, is usually a page and a half to 2 pages, and it's spread out over those 2 pages. Now, it's not like compact paragraphs spread over 2 pages, so you have a whole lot more to read. It's not necessarily that there's more to read, it is usually because of the dialogue that the passage is spread out a little more. Because remember, there are rules with dialogue. Different speakers start new paragraphs. And so another feature of the fiction passage is that paragraphs are often quite short because we have dialogue coming in and sort of interrupting the flow of the regular paragraph. And so understanding and recognizing these features of the fiction passage will prepare students for what to expect. Because when it comes to questions, you always have the vocabulary and the details questions. But when it comes to fiction questions, what you are going to get would be questions about characters and their feelings, how they feel about each other, how they feel about the situation. You might get questions on the reader's feelings about characters and the situation. And then you will have character traits or personality traits that you might have to identify. What do you think about this person? What type of person do you think this character is? So those types of questions will come up with the fiction comprehension. And so, what you would find is that with fiction comprehension, the focus is quite often on the characters. So, yes, you still have the vocabulary to do, but there's usually one question with two vocabulary words. You might get another question with or two questions with details from the passage. So out of the seven questions that will come for the exam, three of them might include details from the passage and like vocabulary, or maybe even four of them might be like that. But you will get at least three questions often about the feelings of the characters, how you would feel, what you would do as a writer if you were in one of the characters' shoes. How do the characters feel about each other? What type of character do you think this person is? And for all of them, you'd have to give evidence from the passage. So, the number one thing with preparing for fiction comprehension is understanding the characters. So for this week, what I would recommend is read and discuss fiction passages. And so if you have the seven stories challenge package, you can use it for both fiction comprehension and the narrative writing. So you get to, double up on the reuse of that resource. So you want to read fiction passages and talk about the characters, how the characters um, interact, why they make certain decisions, if the student would make the same decision as the character did, and so on. And then you want to zero in on the characters themselves, do character reviews and character analyses, and like make a list of personality traits for the characters and so on. And then you want to complete at least one fiction comprehension passage. And so that's really the agenda this week as you get back into the review of the fiction comprehension. And so, if you're looking for resources for that, you can use the practice tests and so on that you have, especially for reading and discussing the fiction passages. If you want to see how questions are answered to get the most marks, then you can get the actual past paper answers. I have a set that covers from 2019 to 2024. That costs 150. So what you're getting would be the answers to the questions, and those answers come with explanations. So I explain. So it's not just enough to say, well, okay, this is the personality trait of the character. What I would also say is this is how you know, and as a student, how you can figure it out from the passage. This is what you look for. So you get guidance on how to answer the questions. And this would be focused on the past papers. And this set includes the same thing, but these are unique passages that I created. So you have two fiction, two nonfiction, two poems, two graphics, and you get the answers plus notes on how the answers were deciphered and how to write the answers um, to the questions. And so you get like an insider way of figuring out how to answer. So it's really a lot of exam preparation and focus. And so these two resources I think would be very useful. If you don't already have them, then definitely get a copy so that they could support your efforts with your child. Okay, so we are at the end of things. We're working on outcomes and consequences for reports this week. We're working on creating and resolving problems for narratives this week. And we're working on fiction comprehension. So, as usual, if you don't already have a study schedule, make a pause and create a schedule so that you can decide what days you have free and available to work on these things. Because I do recommend touching in with each section 3 times for the week. Because that's why when I gave the breakdown, I gave three because you want to do like two 30-minute sessions and one 1 hour session. That's average. So you're spending pretty much 2 hours a week on reports, 2 hours a week on narratives, 2 hours a week on the fiction comprehension. And it's quite likely you're not going to get the 2 hours all together, so you'd have to spread them out. It would make sense to spread them out so that there's that consistent development and consistent review of the reports, narratives, and comprehension. So I know we had some glitches, we had some you know disconnections early on, but I hope you got the information in terms of what you're working on each section. If you missed anything, you can go back to the recording. It's going to be there on YouTube, in the Facebook group. Um, on my Facebook page, and you can also send me a message. So if you want to know a bit more about the outcomes, send me a message and I'll be happy to share what information I can. I do have materials and textbooks that you could work with as well. So you're not facing this narrative writing or comprehension or SEA 2025 on your own. There is support. So feel free to reach out. My number is 717-4993. You can also find me on Facebook, Shelly and Edwards Barron. And like I said, I want to make sure that you have what you need so that you can really support your child to do their absolute best when the exam comes around. There is no substitute for preparation and consistent work because that builds confidence in the student over time that would help them really be calm enough to do their best on the exam. So, thank you very much for tuning in. I sincerely appreciate those of you who were able to take in the live, even with all the glitches. If you're looking at the replay or the recording, thank you so much for your time and your attention. And reach out if there's anything I can do to help. That's what I'm here for. Thank you so much again, and do enjoy the rest of your day today. And I'm going to have to just end it there. I'm really struggling with the internet today. It's not giving me my exit video. It's telling me that it's having trouble, ending, having trouble finding things, but that's all right. Let me stop share so that you can see me properly, and then I can wave and say goodbye. So, always something with the technology, yeah? But I hope you got the information. Still, go back to the recording, reach out, and we'll see what we can do to help. All right. Thank you again. Bye bye.